Hey, gang, how goes? Um, Thank you for joining me early in the morning here. So, couple things. First, this video is brought to you by Dayquil. So I apologize for the cough drop, the Ricola. I had been getting over a cold all month and allergies and stuff. And then I went to NAM. And last night was terrible, and this morning I feel terrible. So it's all come back again. So forgive me. I'll do one of these if I have to, make an ugly cough. Can I mute that at the same time? This is quick. All right. So yeah, that's going to be happening. Unfortunately, sorry guys. Hey, is that Dave? Hey, Dave and Ben, everybody. Okay, so of course, terrible news last week that John Sykes passed away from a battle with cancer. I was very lucky enough to work with him right as I was like turning 30 years old, because he was doing a live album, which ended up becoming Bad Boys Live. And now let me take a quick sidestep. So just so you know, these are my stories. I wasn't friends with John. I mean, we worked together for like a year or so. So like we're work friends, obviously. I spent a lot of time with him during that time. Like we were mixing an album and it took a lot of work and a lot of editing and stuff. So during that time we were together a lot. And, I was a kind of a little bit of an immature 29 going on 30, still figuring out how everything works. And then my career was taking off as a composer. So then I really never saw him again. So when he passed, it hurt just as much as it did for everybody else. Cricket hat. But it's not like we were best buddies. So I just want to let you know that. Also, these stories are my stories. Even if John told me the story, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. I mean, he went through it was an emotional thing, getting the whole Whitesnake stuff. So, that's going to be his side of the story, as he told it to me 30 years ago or whatever. So just so you know, these are just my stories. I hope they're true, or at least there's some truth to them, certainly. Oh, Dave said he just saw him too, and it's so terrible. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's such a bummer. It was so cool to see how many people came out and just constant like Instagram posts and Facebook posts and YouTube posts. I don't know if he knew that when we worked together. Certainly, it's one of those things where you're like, you made one of the biggest rock records of all time, and you got no credit for it. I mean, he's in the liner notes, but how long did everyone think that Vivian Campbell and Adrian Vandenberg played all the guitars on that album? And then there was just this other guy that showed up. Whose name's in there? Anyway, so going back, I'm in my late 20s, or I'm in my 20s, and I'm producing music for like pop music. Not a great time for pop music. That's like the J-Lo era. Enrique Iglesias, it was not awesome. And I was like, I'm going to drive my car off this bridge if I have to continue doing this. So I started composing and doing commercials and stuff like that, just getting away from pop music. And I wanted to engineer as well. So we had worked with this manager named Mark O'Toole. Real big man, sweet as can be. That was Sykes' manager, one of them. When I had a band, our manager was this guy named Stu Rick. he was Sykes's other manager. So I had these connections. I didn't know at the time. I had no idea. But we were working on this pop artist that it sort of had all these rock guitars. And Mark said, oh, it'd be great on this if we get John Sykes to play, his blues guitar on it. And I was just like, yeah, or maybe we could get Eddie Van Halen to put a solo on it or something. He's like, no, I'm his manager. And I was like, oh, what? Why didn't you say so? So from that point, I just bugged him all the time. And of course, John never came to play on this pop music demo. Knowing what I know now in the industry, like he would never have done that. Some unknown girl, that never ended up going anywhere. So as I was leaving pop music world, John was going to make this album. He obviously needed someone to record and mix this thing live. So Mark was like, do you want to do this? It's like, oops, sorry, I kicked the camera. It's like 1,000% totally. And he's like, and I think John's going to be working on a new album. And I think you'd be a great producer for it. You know, all the lineage of music and you're a really good engineer and nice guy and stuff. So it's like, yeah, that too. I want to produce an album with John Sykes. So, this is where sort of being green, early part of the internet, but it really shaped me for the rest of my internet dealings. There was a website called Harmony Central. I think it's still around. They had a really big forum going, kind of in the same way like the Gear Page or, Rig Talk and stuff have a forum that was pretty healthy at one time, going all the time. So, as this kept coming back and Mark's like, yeah, I've been talking to John, get you to produce the album. I was like, well, let me just type on the forum. Hey, gang, like, I might be producing John Sykes' new album. Chat. Instantly, it made its way back to John because he has a guy that handles all his digital stuff. And it was like, oh, never, it wasn't in stone. I don't even know if Mark had actually talked to John yet. Things like that, you have to really smooth over. And I was like, that's it. Fucked. I fucked myself out of it. And that was the first of like, okay. Anything you put on the internet goes to the person you don't want to see it. Just, pro tip. Imagine that. Anything you comment, anything you vlog, whatever, it's going to go to the person you least want to see it. Anyway, so that died for a while. But then it came down to they came down to the wire. I was really good at Pro Tools. I worked on Pro Tools for ages. During my 20s, I was super fast. I'd been told by many people I was one of the fastest Pro Tools guys. Which was a thing then because, you're cutting vocals and editing and comping. John had just bought a Pro Tools rig from a guy. No idea how to use it because he had a studio that was analog still. And they had no idea what to do. So Mark's like, great. Now you're in. That's the in. Just like, I'm back in. He goes, and also maybe you could be the guitar tech for him. It's like, yeah, of course, I know how to tune a guitar. Little did I know, Dave's here, how many things can go wrong. And especially with rock stars, if something's wrong, they're like, fix it. And you're like, I just know how to tune a guitar, dude. I could hand you a guitar across the stage. I was not ready for that at all. But thank the Lord, my buddy Richie Mazzetta, who is also a guitar tech for Stone Temple Pilots. He ended up doing it. I think he worked at the Mesa Boogie store also for a minute. The sweetest dude ever. Just like a server guy. We hit it off. He's great. Dave, do you know Rich Mazzetta? He lives in the Valley here. Or he did. I haven't talked to him for a few minutes too. But I did stay in. Oh, yeah. Richie's the best. He's so nice. And he's not like an amazing technician of fixing stuff, but he's like legit. You know, he's got the open the road case. It's all organized. You got this. You got this. I would have been like, I got pliers and duct tape if I brought that. You know, duh. You come out of your 20s, you're in your 20s, you're like, I'm hot shit. I think you get out of your 20s, you're like, I know nothing. I realize I know nothing. This was one of those journeys like that. It was like, I know nothing. So it was a really big growing thing. All right. So I have a couple notes. Like after I heard John passed away, that night I just laid in bed, listened to the whole Blue Murder album, and just wrote notes as they started coming back to me because I haven't thought about this stuff in ages. Okay, so they're gonna do this. Sykes is gonna do this Japan tour. Yeah, hang on. I showed you last week, but I should have just been more prepared. I've got the flyer. This is the Screamin' Blue Murder tour. Japan tour 2004. Right. Yep. So here's the crazy stuff. You know, this is before iPhones. I'm pretty sure I took some pictures with Sykes, but because of that my opening volley of screwing up on posting on the internet, I was so careful not to be like, oh my God, can I touch your guitar? Can we get a picture? Because I always felt like my existence in this job was hanging by a thread. Of course, Gardner across the street's here. So I was not taking a lot of pictures. I wasn't like, here, stand here, but I know there are some. I don't know where they are. Somewhere on a hard drive or something. I wish I had some. God, we were together so much. There must be some pictures. Anyway, so my first go, they were over at a Third Encore, a big rehearsal studio, setting up for this tour. They had some other keyboard player, and I believe he had a panic attack. And I'm not laughing at him because, you know, panic attacks suck, but it's just a funny thing of like, oh yes, I get to play with Tommy Aldridge, John Sykes, and bass was Marco Mendoza, phenomenal musician. And you're like, here we go. And you're like, this music, I can't follow it. It's too hard. And I think he bugged out after the first rehearsal. So I came on the next one, and they had worked out a deal with Derek Shrinian of Dream Theater fame, and solo stuff. And it's funny because we talked about this later. Like, I think Sykes was, I wouldn't say intimidated, but there was a part of him that was like, he uses like the equivalent of like a street fighter, right? So he obviously knew his arpeggios, he knew music, but really he was gifted. Like, I think he had perfect pitch. Because at one point we were pitching vocals, not his. Every freaking vocal on that live album was the one takedown, completely unpitched. I was shocked. Like, oh, we're just okay. And they're dead on. But, you know, Marco Mendoza's playing and singing. He's doing his, you know, swagger thing. Excuse me. And so his vocals were a little off, you know, and it's live, so they're not matched up. And you want those to be on. Kind of throws it off if someone just screaming in the background. As I mentioned, John had just bought this Pro Tools rig. He didn't have any plugins, zero, and didn't want to drop at the time. Plugins were like $1,200. If you want auto tune, like $1,500. So he wasn't going to do that. So I was manually pitching these vocals, like 15 cents up. Is this what it was? A really great education in just like fine tune editing. Several days through this. This is why it took so long, because every little thing was just, there was no automated things where you just hit a button and it fixes everything. Several days in, John walks in and he always brought me tea. He was always like yelling from the other room, Mike, you want some tea? Or he'd come in, he was like, you look tired, mate. Like, get you some tea. PG tips. It was always PG tips. And I was like, this is the best tea I've ever had. With a little milk. And I told this to someone else and they're like, oh, that's the low end. But man, PG tips was great. That's my tea now. Because of Sykes. Anyway, back to his pitching vocals. So he came in and he's like, I just don't understand why like people sing out of tune. He says, I just see the notes and then I just sing the notes. It was like he just has a complete visual reference of the notes. And he's like, and then you just go to it and do that. That's not how I work. I don't know. That sounds like someone that has like a perfect pitch or close to perfect pitch. Yeah, his vocals, they were always on. It was like amazing. So I'm at this rehearsal, the first rehearsal, and I walk in and this is again, early internet. So what I know of John Sykes is the videos from Blue Murder, pretty much. That's like it. So I go in and there's this humongous blonde man. And I'm like, I think that's John Sykes. But in the past, I have made mistakes before. I called Simon Phillips's drum tech. I was like, Simon, I just saw you play. It's amazing. Guy let me go on for like 10 minutes. He's like, hey, man, I'm sorry. I'm not Simon. So I was also very sensitive to this at this point. I'm like, I don't know. Is that John? So again, stupidly, I'm like, at some point he comes over and I was like, oh, hey, John, I didn't recognize you. Now, I think that would be taken as an insult. I probably would take it as an insult now. I totally see where he's like, no, I didn't recognize you either. And I was like, okay, I'll just be over here. Another foot in the mouth, like dumbass thing. Anyway, they're rehearsing. They sound amazing. He's got his Rode case up. It's the same one that I think I used on the picture, the thumbnail picture. I mean, it is the same one I used on the thumbnail picture. That's the guitars he had with him always. And that's, aside from the Jackson or Charvel, I can't remember what he has with the whammy bar. That was everything I'd ever seen. I don't know if he has more. He does have one guitar. He was like, sorry, I'm jumping around. The memories are coming back as I do this too. I'm trying to like memory dump for you guys. He had just finished like a nice stint with Thin Lizzy. And I think at some point they opened for Joe Satriani because he's like, check this out. Joe Satriani gave me this guitar. He was so psyched. No pun intended. He was so pumped that Joe Satriani gave him the guitar. This is one of those things like, dude, of course you're John Sykes. Everyone should be giving you guitars. Like, it shouldn't be like, you shouldn't feel like you're below Joe Satriani. But I think because, it's like just psychoanalyzing. Like, he never got his due. I think he always felt like, he was like the term redheaded stepchild. No offense to redheads. Love me some redheads. I think he always felt like that. Like, which sucks. I wish he had come back and done like an album that just blew people away and could have done a G3 tour or something like that. It would have been epic. Yeah, so we had that Rode case of guitars, a big sign that said something like "Do not touch." It was a very unwelcome. You couldn't just walk over and be like, "Oh, look at that 60s Strat," or the Les Paul Custom. which is another weird thing. He had that one Les Paul Custom that I saw, and then everything else was Les Paul standards. When you think he would have 3 of like Les Paul Customs, but he was like, that's the one. And then his Jose amp, he was using Jose amps. He just brought one with him. Like, he had 2 at rehearsals and stuff, but he just brought one. I remember sitting at LAX, the Tom Bradley terminal, the international terminal, and he just left his guitar case and the amp case, like on the side of the street. Like, could have just grabbed it, hopped in a car, and ran off. So I was like, I'm gonna sit here with your guitar just in case no one asks. No one's gonna do that. Okay, I'm gonna take it upon myself to just watch this stuff. And then he was like, yeah, if I don't have that Jose, I'm not playing. He loved that Jose, apparently. Yeah, sorry, I'm not paying attention to the chat much. I love that you guys are talking. I hope there's other stories in there and stuff. I'll go back and read all this stuff later. Yeah. So then right away, what we had to do in setting up, like, he hadn't played this Blue Murder stuff. So, like, for Jelly Roll, there's an opening like drum loop, and we had to get it off the tapes. So we went back to his house, which was kind of like Northridge area, which was quite a treat. It was the first time I was there, and I was like, I can't believe I'm going in here. And I walk in the side door, and you first walk into his live room, and he had 2 Mesa half stacks set up with the Coliseum heads. See, like, then there were shelves, and he had like his tri-axis in the shelf, and there was like a PCM 41 in the shelf. And thinking like, oh my God, this is all this stuff. Cool live room, like not huge, because it was all an add-on to his house. And then it went into the garage. The garage was the studio. Again, not huge, way bigger than like my room, but definitely like a nice. And he goes through his tape closet where he has all these tapes and masters and stuff. And in there, he's like, oh yeah, this is this. Oh, I think I saw written on the side, it said Ray Gillen. They have albums or a demo or something of the Blue Murder iteration with Ray Gillen, the singer from Badlands, which is like, dude, why don't you put that out? And he was like, he's like, yeah, it's just, it costs a lot of money. And like, he was very like, what's the point? And again, it's like, it's a weird time in music. After the 80s, everything was a weird time in music. After the 90s, I should say. It's a weird time. I remember him saying, he's like, I hate all the music today. All these whiny singers. It's like, they just whine. Which is like, maybe that was like getting to like Fall Out Boy era in Linkin Park. Quite possibly. Just like, he's like, I can't even. He's like, how about can't a man sing a little bit? Not some little kid. Oh, wait, that sounds like Blink-182. Maybe he heard some Blink-182. Anyway, so he's got these tapes with Ray Gillen singing. And he found his reel with Jelly Roll. So, gets it going on there. And I can't remember, what was it that he had? He has the strongest fingers like I'd ever seen up to that point. Like, he's a big guy. I don't, in my head also, because he's an icon, maybe he was like, in my head, he's like 6'3". Maybe he's 5'11". I'm not even sure. And then he's got hair. It's hard to say. So we get that Jelly Roll loop off, and he's like, oh, well, whatever. He's going to throw the tape in the trash. I'm like, you can't throw it in the trash. So we got I'm like, how about we take like a coffee can and re-spool it up? Something went wrong, and I can't really remember what happened there, but yeah, they had the cable ties, and he just would take his fingers and just go and rip the ends of the cable ties off. Pop, pop. Super strong. Crazy. Sorry, I'm getting texts. I have to try to ignore it. Uh-oh, here it comes. All right. Let's see. Oh yeah, so for the Screaming Blue Murder tour, I would also trigger the samples, like the opening, like there's a siren before we all fall down and all that. And I was supposed to play rhythm guitar, the acoustic guitar on Jelly Roll, and talk about shitting bricks. And I was like, I am not ready to get on stage with John Sykes and Tommy Aldridge, and it'd be cool. Rich Mazzetta ended up doing it, and he was fantastic. Good guitar player too. His guitar tech, which is great, sweetest guy ever. Remember Derek Shrinian saying like, he's like, I've worked so hard to get on stage with Tommy Aldridge. And he's like, and this guy, this guitar tech just walked up and gets to play. No, he was funny. I was scared to death every time I had to trigger one of those samples, you know, that it was going to go like, oh my God, here it comes. And then there was a part in one of the songs, it was a newer song that had like a loop, Ken learning experience. So I was out with the front of house, and at the end I would have to, we figured out like, okay, I can't just trigger the loop. I would hit go every like 4 bars. That's how we would keep it in time. But the slight delay of where Tommy Aldridge was and where I was, it was enough to be like, so I think by the end of that run, Tommy hated me. He's like, next time you should be sitting next to me so that we're in sync. And he's like, I'm trying to stay in time with your fucking bullshit. But I was in time where I was sitting. He was hearing it at a time where he was sitting. You know, that's why you hire professionals and not kids to run your show. Oh yeah. Yeah, and then that first show, again, you should definitely have a good guitar tech. Sykes requested, he was using backline cabs. He requested 100-watt Celestions. Are there 100-watt Celestions? Is that a thing? If anyone knows. See you, Dave. Thanks for dropping in. So smartly, Rich Mazzetta opened them up, and they were not 100-watt Celestions. They were 75-watt Celestions. And Sykes threw a fit. He went nuts. Because, you know, he's hadn't really played this material, and he's like, it's got to be right. And the stupid cartridge company messed it up. And then something was wrong with his guitar. He had to take it to the head of ESP in Japan and stuff, which he wasn't thrilled about either. Really wild. Anyway, Rich Mazzetta saw that the speakers were wired incorrectly. One of them was out of phase, which was making him sound really bad. Once he got it all wired up, he's like, no. This cab sounds real good. So we mic'd them up with 57s, you know, as you do. And I had an extra channel because I'm recording it, Pro Tools, right? I'm like, well, I didn't have another SM57 around, but there's a Sennheiser 421. So I'm like, let me go put that up there. That'll be my backup mic, you know, whatever. You can't tell what I'm getting. You're just eyeballing it, going, okay, hope it's cool. So I'm like, let me take as many options as I can. Oh, when he saw that Sennheiser up there, he did not like that either. He's like, oh, who put this mic? Oh my God. I was like, sorry. He's like, you won't hear. It was just a backup mic. I think I mentioned the other day, like, he would always come in hot. Maybe he's stressed, you know. He would come in hot. And then I'm not someone to come back hot. I kind of like bring the energy down. And then he would come back down, and he was a real gentleman, always. Like, he was never, I wouldn't say he was ever an asshole to me at all. Oh man, he had one of those Hummers. Remember when Hummers came back and they were real popular? He left that first rehearsal, and I think he was like just spinning, and he went to get gas, and he put diesel fuel in it, which it wasn't diesel. That was another thing. They're like, oh, you gotta drain that whole car out, take it to the shop. Dirt to derp. Yeah, so the first night, we start recording. They go into, I think Bad Boys was maybe the first song that they hit. Yes, here we go. Recording. It's great. Halfway through the song, Pro Tools go dip and just stops. Like, oh my God. Quickly reinitiate the recording. Here we go. Okay. Blip. Just stops. I think I maybe got through one song in its completion. It kept dying. This is the era when Pro Tools was so unstable. It was just awful. So about halfway through the show, I just sat down and watched the show. I was like, this is great. Now, that night, when it got back to John, that we didn't have a recording, he lost his shit because he's like, that's why you're here. Again, that was a big growing moment of like, yeah, that is why I'm here. I should have done whatever it took all night if I was just like record. Anyway, we had a long talk. And then at the end, he was like, hey, we're going to go out. Why don't you come out with us? I was like, no, if it takes all night, I'm going to go work on this Pro Tools rig until I figure out why it's crashing, and I'll get it going. And he's like, yeah, good man. That's right. That was the moment where I was like, yeah, that's what professionals do. You go get your shit done, Another night when we were out, it's weird. There's this group of us, this young prostitute kind of came out. I don't remember which city it was in. He was so nice to her. Like, was very sympathetic, and like just gave her a bunch of money and then like sent her on her way. I thought that was quite nice because, rock star stories. I was like, oh, here we go. Unless he slipped her like, here's my card also. But no, I don't think so. I think it was just like a really nice moment of like sympathy. And you could hear that in some of his lyrics, you could kind of hear that other lyrics like Sex Child, where it's like, oh, those lyrics, slipping and sliding and stuff. It's like, that's some rough lyrics. Oof. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I'll leave that at that. Sorry, I'm going to blow my nose for a minute. Hold on a second. I'm not going to let you see this, so give me 1 second. Oh, I should have muted that too, so you get all sound and no visual. That's even worse. Yeah. Well, that Pro Tools rig, that wasn't the last time it really screwed me over. When we got back and we're like, well, let's see what we got. The first rough mix I did was on Bad Boys because I was like, yeah, that's what I want to hear. So that was like a pretty quick rough mix. Then the computer crashed so bad and the drives went corrupted and that whole session went kaput. It was awful. And I could never reopen that session. But he liked that. So it was like, okay, so that is what the sound of the album is. It is what it is there. Robert Baker, do I remember what the full set was? It was everything on that album. There was nothing left off. It was not a long set. And there was no opening band. So maybe that's how it worked in Japan at the time, where they were just like, all right, you get like an hour of music. Congrats. Go on. Obviously there's talking in between that stretched it out. But yeah, it wasn't a long set. He didn't do Valley of the Kings, which is one of my favorite songs, which is, that's a good like 6-minute jam. he did it. They did it in rehearsal, and then they did it in sound check one time when the promoter was there, because the promoter loved that song. So we did it for the promoter. No, the promoter wasn't there, and he was like, "He's not even here." Yeah, that was the only time they did it, and he used gold top Les Paul for that because it was drop D. It was drop D there. So I was supposed to have production credit on this album. It was like produced, by, mixed by, and stuff like that. And then when I got it, it was produced, mixed, and engineered by John Sykes, and then mixed and engineered by Michael Nielsen. And then I learned later that first manager that was my band manager, he screwed me over on purpose. He's like, "Yeah, this band." He just had it out for me. There was nothing that my buddy Mark could do about it. So I was like, whatever. Not that really changed anything. Let's see. His studio. What did he have in his studio? I don't remember what the console was. We did, because he had no plugins. We would feed stuff out to the console on that live album. And he, the first day, put the guitars out, and I was like, "Oh, I felt like they were a little dark." So I went to EQ, and he was like, "Hey, did you change something on my guitars?" I was like, "Okay." All the blood went to my feet. I'm like, "Oh no." And I'm like, "Yeah, I just added a little openness." And then he went over, like A B to A B to A B. Okay, all right, that sounds good. Like, okay, now I learned, don't mess with his guitars. And he said, he's like, "I love to have like a bright room sound on the guitars," which you could totally hear, especially if I was listening to Isolated Guitar on Still of the Night. There's a lot of room, but at this time, I wasn't even like super into stereo. I was just thinking like, stereo guitars and everything. I was like about dry, like Audio Slave dry, which, now I go, that's a thing. And the wet, wide stereo, that's a thing. And I love them both equally. But at the time I was like, no, stereo guitar. So I made it drier than I definitely would have now. He had a couple AMS units, which are super expensive now, reverb and a delay. So we had a nice little like bright room on the AMS reverb that sounded awesome. He had a Lexicon 480L, and so that we had like the hall club sound. Everything got reverb through there. He had some Neves that we put the bass through Neves, because Marco's sound didn't sound great. He was using all this PV gear. It just kind of sounded flimsy. So we kind of went through like, I think an 1176 LA2A and the Neves to really beef it up. That was one thing we sat together and was like, "I don't know, you give it a shot," and to really try and dial that in. I think maybe any of the echoes and stuff were just, I know some of the sound man, the live sound guy, puts some stuff in there, and maybe that's all he had. I may have added some on vocals and things like that. And the drums were really tricky because at the time, Pro Tools didn't have delay compensation properly. So if you added one plugin, okay, here's the deal. Let's say a drum kit is made up of 5 elements, 5 microphones. They need to be in phase. So that means they're all, essentially, we'll just call it in sync, right? And if you put one of these, a delay on them, because it goes through a plugin, it shifts backwards, it changes the whole tone of the drum kit. So the snare will go from like ga to like goo, ga, changes everything. So I had to be really careful about all that stuff. It is horrible time to work on Pro Tools, actually, and all of that stuff. I think most of it, maybe the snare kick went out to some outboard stuff. But when you listen to the album, it's fairly dry because I just didn't have a lot of options. There was not a lot to work with there. Let's see what else I got in here, guys. Oh, we always had a stack. He had a stack of CDs. Back there was, the producer's sofa at the back of the studio, and there was a stack of CDs there. And he had the Scorpions album with Michael Schenker. Another, I think it was an MSG Michael Schenker album that was live. A couple others, but those were the two where I was like, I hadn't ever really listened to Michael Schenker before. And he's like, dude, it's like, these are the best albums ever. So now I go back and you could hear like, oh yeah, he was totally influenced by that stuff. Yeah. Robert Baker, bass playing on the first Blue Murder album. I love it. It's all fretless. Which is why he ended up having Marco Mendoza, because Marco could play fretless, and like to cop that stuff is really super hard. Yeah, that first album. Shoot, I'm blanking on with the bass player. Tony Franklin, yeah. Tony Franklin, still around. I think I saw him at NAMM in line for the bathroom. I was going up the elevator. And Carmen Appice, I think that's how it's pronounced. Appice? So I'd ask John, I'm like, hey man, why don't you get back together? Do like a thing. And he goes, ugh, Carmine's too old. And it was like, now when I go back, like Carmine was like 55 at the time and John was like 45. Like, oh, that stings. That's a little close to home, man. I did talk about like, it's like, your harmonics, it sure sounds a lot like Zach. And he goes, yeah, Zach told me, he's like, I totally ripped that off from you, which I haven't heard Zach mention that again, but John said it. John said it that Zach said it to him, but you never know. Maybe Zach was just flattering him at the time, because I think I had heard Zach say he got it from somewhere else. But I mean, no one else had done those like kind of in the rhythm work, those big jumps to the harmonic that I could think of before Sykes did that. Can we talk about Blue Murder for a minute? And I think this came from his manager. I think the reason that Mark said Blue Murder tanked, it's, compared to Whitesnake, is that allegedly the singer of the other band went to Geffen. They were both on Geffen, which is a terrible idea to have, a fallout and, to have the same label. Went to Geffen and said, I don't want this to succeed. You got to stop promoting this. That could be a paranoia thing. Like Prince thought Sony had spies and secret cameras in his studio. Maybe he was right. I don't know. But that's one of the reasons I heard that it tanked. But also, like, I didn't ever realize Screaming Blue Murder is like saying Screaming Bloody Murder. So I always thought Blue Murder was a pirate term, because why would you go with this pirate theme? Like Whitesnake had this sort of like medieval superhero kind of vibe, and then the progression of it, maybe they were just like, well, look, you got to have some sort of leather pant Dio sort of vibe, right? But they went full pirate. And I never really got that. When you're jumping from Pearl Jam to pirate outfits, that just never seemed to work. Even as a kid, I was like, odd choice here, guys. Never go full pirate, right? That's coming from Fishbowl. He knows about the sea and stuff. So yeah, that was a weird one. But I'd heard that Sykes was in the studio recording Whitesnake, right? And I had heard that his engineer told him, like, hey, this is not, you're not gonna be able to finish the album. They're like cutting us off or something like that. And they made some kind of agreement. They're like, they hadn't recorded any solos yet. So can you imagine a Whitesnake album, 87, with entirely different solos? Like the Vandenberg solo on Here I Go Again is perfect. That's great. But if you listen to Vandenberg albums, like that was a perfect vehicle for him. The other stuff was not going to fly. It's, you know, it wasn't going to deliver that sort of absolute power and balance of power and finesse. So John and his engineer, they're like, I know we're fired or we're cut off, you know, but let's do the solos and let's make them absolutely irreplaceable. Like, so that they can't bring it. Who are you going to bring in to replace this? That was their approach. And I don't know if that's a true story from as I heard it. Yep, they nailed it, right? Pretty crazy. Then I did hear at some point it was a big run-in where Sykes went back to confront Coverdale because I think it was all done on the phone. And I think there was a baseball bat and a car involved at some point. This is very hearsay at this point, where it was like he told me that a car was really obliterated, you know. Yeah, so that's all that from my memories. There was just so many other like little things. I'll tell you, like I've met quite a few celebrities, and often I don't know what comes first. I don't know if you become a celebrity and then you get this sort of aura and persona, or if you have that aura and persona and it allows you to become a celebrity. But he was one of those guys when you're in the room, you're like, oh, he's a rock star, 100%. And you know, there are times where you be careful about introducing your girlfriend to this guy. You know, through no fault of his own. Totally. Let me see. I'll flip through if there's any other questions. I would say he really liked this live album we did. He was pumped. He would come in and be like super psyched. And then he would you know, he'd sit and play his Les Paul on the producer couch in the back, and it's just like, I'm trying to work. And then I'm also trying to like be the equivalent of trying to work while you're getting a lap dance. You're like, it's very difficult to pay attention to the work. I want to see this. Unbelievable. It sounded exactly the same. This is like those guys that are so good. And strong, his hands are so strong. There are only like one or two other people I've heard when they play unamplified electric where you could tell you're like, wow, that's some other planet that I don't know how they do that. Is Bad Boys Live and Screaming Blue Murder from the same tour? No, I actually think they're almost 8 years apart. Bad Boys Live, I think, is was his Mesa Boogie stuff. Yeah, right. Sykes was supposed to be the part of the group with Billy Sheehan and Mike Portnoy, and it just never worked out. I think it was just a timing thing where it's like Sykes was like meticulous and I think slow, and they didn't want that. Sorry, I have to check a text real quick. Man. Yeah, Dave had mentioned that Sykes said if he ever encountered Coverdale again, he would deck him. He certainly could. Big dude. Yeah. A life-changing thing that Coverdale did by firing him, which I still don't get it. I think it was just a sort of a power struggle thing. Certainly wasn't. It certainly wasn't about the playing and stuff. So I can see why Sykes never really went back for any of those times when Coverdale says he reached out. No. Chris Quinn. Sykes was 6 foot, 6'5" with hair, open shirt, and necklaces. Yeah. Yeah, that totally reminds me. So he would sit, I'm working in the studio, and he would sit in the doorway, with his arm up in the door jamb without a shirt, which I am a shirt guy, 100%. Like, I'll go to the pool, that's fine, or, slightly around the house. But if I'm going to be watching TV or hanging out or eating, shirt's going on. Not Sykes. Very comfortable shirtless in any company, whoever's around. So you have this his arm up here. And I remember just, like I'll do this and I'll like fiddle with like the bits of like beard hair or whatnot. So he had like man armpit hair, and he's just like, I'm having a conversation as he's like, this is the weirdest moment of my life up to this point. Tommy Aldridge is also 6'5" with hair. Yes. He had a serious hairdo. That dude was little, shredded, with huge hair. Yeah, it's crazy how John could make his Les Paul sound like it had a whammy bar, but he also had a guitar with a Floyd Rose. So it's funny that you go from a Jackson to a Les Paul Custom, and it sounds pretty much the same. But when you listen, especially on Blue Murder, he would do this wah thing that was like very subtle shifts in just the filter. It was never a Kirk Hammett wham, wham, wham. It was just subtle. And you get this like really piercing filter. But you hear solos like, oh, that's the whammy bar guitar. So if it sounds a lot like a whammy bar, it probably is the whammy bar. But yeah, he could at like the first fret on the low string hit a harmonic, or we'll say second fret, and just go whoa, super strong. He did not use any harmonizers live. It was like pretty raw. He was also coming off of that Thin Lizzy tour, so he was maybe in like a particularly like sort of classic rock sort of vibe. It was a lot of gain out of the Jose's that he had, but he was very particular about like guitar to amp. In fact, on he sang he sang Is This Love as part of the set. And so he rented backline of the Roland JC 120s and then had an AB switcher box. But Richie, the guitar tech, before the song started, he had to run out, bypass the amp, plug in the AB box, remember to turn the amp back on. Go, you're good. And then as soon as the song was over, run out, bypass the amp, unplug the AV box, go straight back into the Marshall head, turn it back into play, run back. You're good. You're good. So he didn't like the sound. He's like an Eric Johnson kind of thing where he's like, nope, I could totally tell. He was very tuned in to that stuff. So there's no effects. The only effects were like delays live. And no, he just had it cranked. No Rocktron juice extractor was used in Japan anyway. So fishbowl bath, did I play it Les Paul at all? Curious how it was set up. Yeah, I was at the house so much. The house was where the studio was, you know, and then he would leave and stuff. And I thought, wow, that's really trusting. It's just like, okay, so like, see you later. But yeah, so he had that rack of guitars there. And at one point I'm like, I cannot go do this whole project and not play these guitars. So I picked up the Strat, which is, I believe is the clean stuff, unlike Is This Love, and then his Les Paul. And it felt like a 70s Les Paul. You know, honestly, there was no, like, at the time, I wasn't tuned in enough of action and, you know, frets, if it was refretted and all that kind of stuff. You know, at that point, I really only had my Ibanez from, you know, my teen era, and I have a PRS Custom 22, and I had a Tele. So I didn't have a lot of experience with a whole bunch of different guitars and stuff. So just feeling the Les Paul Custom was the first time I'd ever felt a custom either. It was heavy, like a Les Paul Custom. Remember, we were on the phone before we had met. I think that was we talked for like an hour or two. That was the like, all right, just see if this is the manager telling John, just see if Mike is an asshole. See if you guys can get along. And remember going like, oh, he's like, you're a Les Paul guy, right? And I was like, no, I would like a Les Paul, but I'm a PRS guy. And he's like, oh, okay. Strike one. And then he had said also, like, yeah, you know, I as if I didn't know. He's like, I play, you know, 70s Les Paul. You know, I change out this pickup and whatever. And I'm like, oh yeah, the nickname for that era of Les Paul was Fretless Wonder, because I think it had low, small frets. And I was like, oh yeah, so that's how you're able to like get those really big bends up high. And it was, you know, of course, silence. And then like, no, my hands is how I how I make it do that. He's like, I sound the same on every guitar. I was like, I need strike two. So idiot, right? Duh. So I don't like to talk to my heroes because I'm like, you're gonna say something stupid. 100%. Edmund says, Mike, what would you say was integral or quintessential John Sykes in terms of his guitar tone that many of us would know of, apart from his slaved Mesa Coliseum or Les Paul Custom? You know what? Dude, it's totally his hands. Him, Eddie Van Halen, I wouldn't say everybody. Not everybody, it's their hands. But for sure, those guys. Because he sounded the same unplugged in. He sounds the same on the Floyd Rose, like Jackson Shredder. Sounds the same on a old Les Paul. He sounds the same pretty much through a Marshall. Sounds the same through a Mesa Boogie. Really didn't matter. You could hear some of the Whitesnake album isn't Mesa Boogie. It's Marshall. And if you get the isolated track, you could hear, you're like, oh, it doesn't have that Mesa Boogie scoop. It has way less gain, but his attack is so aggressive. He always had sandpaper, like some, I can't remember what grit it was, if it was heavy or light grit, but he always had a little slice of sandpaper around, right? And so every one of his picks, when it was like almost a nervous twitch, like when he wasn't playing, he would like sandpaper the edge. Do I still have a Sykes pick around here? I bet you I do. It'll take me too long to find it, but I'll have to check to see what it feels like. So he'd make the edge gritty. It wasn't a smooth, like a seamless pick thing. I think he liked every time he picked it to have a strong attack, and that friction from the sandpaper is always getting it back or smoothing it out. I can't really tell, but I know the ones that like of course I'd be like, pick mine. I know I have picks from there. They're like gritty along the edge. He also, he was playing those Dunlop Tortex, which have a very strong squared off edge. So maybe he also was kind of taking away that edge a little bit. Vinny Appice. Appice is how it's pronounced. Vinny Appice. I don't know. You know what I mean. Yep, purple Tortex. Was he using 11s? I can't remember. I was a little less into the guitar nerd. No, I was a lot less into the guitar nerd. I was a huge Whitesnake fan and Sykes Blue Murder fan. But I wasn't like all like super nerdy, like what tubes you have in there or whatever. Again, it's like I was just trying not to lose this job, this high-paying job. I think I made maybe $2,500 on it for like 6 months of work. I didn't care. I would have done it for free. It was a very low-paying job. The string gauge was either 10 or 11. I can't remember. Yeah, and they were just Ernie balls. He had stacks of them around. The loadout photo. Yeah, I love that photo of his rack where he has the dual rectifier. That's going into some kind of like juice extractor, and then he has a tri-axis, which I'm guessing he used for the clean tones. And just switched, and a Mesa high gain amp switcher to jump between them. Sykes was actually 5'11". Really? I was taller than him. Man. Yeah, Sykes was a killer singer. All effects, delays, green calyx. All the effects were added after the mic. He didn't like anything in between him and the amp. He did have some, like, cool to see those magazines laying around. It's not like he gave a shit about them, it seemed like. He just had, like, Young Guitar, that Japanese magazine. Like, all of his ones where he was on the cover or in there. It was kind of thrown about in his office. Yeah, and the PCVM 41, he used in his rigs at some point, but again, like, I think once he hit that, like, Thin Lizzy zone, late 90s, 2000s, he just didn't mess with the effects anymore. He just went straight in. He cut a solo for Derek Shrinian, which was so cool. I mean, that's how they got Derek in the band. They worked out an agreement, like, cool, I'll work with you and you work with me. So I got to comp that solo. I should find, I don't know if I ever went back and listened to the album. Yeah, Sykes recorded. I wasn't in the room when he did it. He's like, set me all up. Set it all up. Give me like 3 tracks. He's like, and I'll record them tonight. Come back tomorrow and you could comp them. He's like, I don't care what you do. Wild Wolf. No, I don't think it was bigger frets. I think it was original, like you were not original. You probably played the shit out of them, but it was just same old frets. I don't know if on the 87 Whitesnake album, those were Jose Marshalls. It was Mesas and Marshalls, but I don't think they were Jose Marshalls. All right, I think I'm getting to the end here, gang. Was there any gear that John used that surprised me? Well, I was not nerding out about the Jose Marshall. I was like, oh, that's cool. You know, that's the Van Halen mod guy. But I didn't love it. I was like, oh, there's something in the low mid-range that sounded congested that I never loved. And I was always like trying to secretly like slightly EQ it out whenever I could. So I wasn't like, yay. But that's it. He didn't use a lot of gear. There's no pedals in front of him. I don't even think a tuner. I don't even think the tuner he had to, if he wanted to tune, he would bypass his amp and go into a tuner. Or he'd just tune it by ear. I mean, he would do that. Tony Franklin. Yeah, Tony Franklin's a pretty small dude. I did get to meet him. He was at Derek Sherinian's house, and I was like, oh, what's up, dude? I love Blue Murder. And John had said, oh, you know, say hi for me. I was like, John says hi. And he was kind of like, oh, really? Fine. Complicated relationship, right? Favorite moment working with Sykes while working with him. It's gotta be, it's just like the mastering session was fun because my job was done and you know his job was done. We did it with Steph Marsh, and he was just psyched. Again, I keep using that word, but he was so pumped. He's like, "This is so awesome." He's like, "You're gonna get so much work from this." I got 0 work from this, but he was really happy. So that was really happy. You know, it was one of those weird times in my life too. You know, I was coming out of being absolutely broke for 10 years, just you know, working and working and working, trying to make money and stuff. And then I was starting to get some good traction and that. So it was like I wasn't making enough money on this for me to prioritize it. I just had to do it whenever I could. At some point, he's like, "Hey, man, can we just put a deadline on this so we finish?" I go, "Okay, sorry." And I was I was really into Django Reinhardt at the time. And YouTube was just kind of new. So I was like, dude, check out this video of Django Reinhardt just shredding. And he's like, yeah, that's amazing. He's like, no one would buy that. He's like, what? He's like, what's the point of learning it these days? It's like, no one's going to come pay to see that. You know, he's the breadwinner for his family. He's got to learn how to, hadn't had an album in a long time too. So he's got to make money. Yeah, Wild Wolf. I'd mentioned before, his aggressive is totally loud. And what blew me away is when he's plugged in and he sounds like he's blazing. He's not moving that fast. Like Yeah, you know, you go to NAM and you see some guys just like where the hands are like, and you're like, that's fast. Sykes is like, it just didn't look like he was moving that fast. It just, everything was so big and aggressive that there was no room for things to get faster. I don't know. It was weird. It like defied like what I was seeing and what I was hearing kind of didn't make sense. But those like were just blurs. Him and Neil Sean could do that where like it's just turns into a blur of notes. But Neil is a little quicker. John, it's like a aircraft carrier coming at you. You're like, this isn't going to turn. It's coming. Yeah, wild. All right, gang. So that's probably all I could think of for now. Yeah, I mean, great guy. Feel bad for his family. What a musician. You'd sit down at the grand piano and play, and you're like, oh, you play piano too. Okay. Yeah, of course. Makes sense. Just really, really awesome, incredible musician. So thanks for joining me, gang. Yeah, we'll try and pick up next week and maybe talk about NAMM or something like that. Again, oh, I did check out Carnival, and Carnival is awesome. Yes, very cool. Thank you for the tip. Well, Sykes is picking in. Yeah, the way it's like an upside down thing, right? Super, super weird. Constantly rolling up his volume knob. Play a chord, make sure the volume knob is at full. Chord, volume knob. Pick up, volume knob. He'd be singing, and it's just like volume knob, tone knob, to get just constant. Everything is like up, 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 up. Another weird memory that just jumped in my head. All right, gang. Have a great day. I will see you all later.